Welcome in, everybody. We are diving into a fascinating interview today, one that really kind of threw everyone for a loop.
It did.
Vice President Kamala Harris sitting down on Fox News with Bret Baier.
Yeah.
You guys wanted this one unpacked, so here we are. We'll break it down, see if we can analyze what went on, what tactics were being used, and maybe, just maybe, think about what it all means going forward. Because, let's be honest, you don't see a sitting VP on Fox News every day.
You don't. It's certainly not typical. And to really grasp the weight of this is Harris's first time ever on Fox News.
Really?
And the Biden administration, they haven't exactly gone out of their way to engage with that network, by and large.
So why the change?
Right.
And more specifically, why now? Why this particular moment with the election cycle already starting to heat up?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, it adds another layer when you think about who she's facing, right?
Yeah.
Bret Baier, he has this reputation
Oh, yeah.
for really pushing, He doesn't let people off the hook.
No, he's known for being tough.
Asks the tough questions, regardless of your political affiliation. You're going to get grilled a little bit.
And, in a way, it almost reminded me of those intense interviews you see during primaries.
Oh, yeah.
When candidates are really getting grilled, which is interesting because Harris, she didn't go through that in 2020.
Right.
So to step into that arena now, particularly on a network that's known for having a more conservative audience,
Right.
it feels bold, maybe even calculated. I don't know. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because it becomes about more than just the words themselves.
Right.
It's the motivations, the strategies at play.
Yeah.
That's what makes this so fascinating to analyze.
And nowhere was that more clear than when immigration came up.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a heated exchange.
Right.
Baier did not hold back. He kept pressing Harris for hard numbers, actual figures on illegal immigrants being released, even cited, I think he said an estimate of 6 million.
Yeah, yeah.
You could tell, even just watching the clip, things were getting tense.
It's interesting, right? You have these two very distinct communication styles. Baier's classic, like we said, he's going for that direct answer, doesn't let up. And then you have Harris, who tends to give these more, well-rounded answers.
Yeah. Wants to give the whole picture.
Yeah, more nuanced. And you could really see that clash, I think, when it came to this issue in particular.
And it was interesting, too, because they both brought up that U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Right.
And they used it in such different ways to kind of bolster their own argument.
Absolutely.
Just to back up for a second, for anyone who's not, totally up on their immigration legislation,
Right.
This bill was a big deal at the start of Biden's term. The goal was to create some kind of pathway to citizenship, right? For undocumented immigrants, millions of them. But then, we all know how the story goes, it died in the Senate. Didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and this is where the strategy comes in, right? Because Baier's using it. The fact that the bill failed is this example of how Democrats can't even agree amongst themselves. He brought up how some Democrats even voted against it, which is true, by the way. But
Right.
Then you have Harris. She's using it as proof that they're trying.
That they're trying to get things done.
That they have this commitment to immigration reform, but it's like they're hitting a wall.
Yeah.
And it's like this perfect example of how a single policy, a single piece of legislation becomes this tool.
Oh, totally. A political chess piece.
Exactly. But for our listener at home, someone who might not be, living and breathing the ins and outs of immigration,
Sure.
Why does this matter? Why is this such a huge deal, especially as we're all gearing up to vote again?
Yeah, it's a good question. Help us understand.
Well, to really get it, we have to sort of zoom out from Washington, D.C., We have to look at what's happening on the ground, how these issues are playing out in people's lives.
It's real life, right? It's not just what the politicians are saying. These are things that are actually affecting people day to day.
And, it's interesting because we have our correspondent, Annalise Nelson. She's been down in Georgia.
Oh, right.
And that state, as we all know, has become kind of a microcosm for these bigger political battles we're seeing.
Yeah, definitely a swing state to watch.
And she's been talking to voters there, getting a sense of, what are their concerns, what's on their minds. And one thing that keeps coming up is immigration. But it's often tied to these very real economic anxieties.
Like what specifically when you say economic anxieties?
Well, think about it. A lot of voters, they're dealing with stagnant wages. Cost of living, everything's going up. There's this sense of, just this unease about the economy in general. And for some people, immigration becomes this focal point for those feelings.
I could see that.
Whether it's about jobs, competition for jobs, or maybe it's about resources, strain on social services, things like that. It becomes this lens through which they view these bigger issues.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting how those personal experiences, those struggles, really shape how someone views a policy or even a politician. But going back to the interview for a second, that back and forth, how did people react to that? Was there a consensus? Did people generally feel like Baier was being fair? Or was it the opposite?
Oh, man, you're not going to believe this, but there was no consensus. It's like the country, right? Completely divided.
I'm shocked, I tell you.
Some people, they thought Baier was way too aggressive.
Yeah.
Like rude even, interrupting, not really giving Harris the space to explain herself.
Right.
And that tracks. Right. If you already kind of distrust Fox News, if you disagree with their slant.
Which, let's be real, a lot of people do.
Exactly. It just confirmed what they already thought. But then, on the flip side, you have all these other viewers who loved it. Oh, yeah. They thought he was great. Finally, someone cutting through the you-know-what.
Right.
Asking the tough questions. Holding her accountable. And you can probably guess, those tended to be the folks who see Fox News as, like, their go-to for information.
So it's not just about what's being said in these interviews. It's almost like the interview itself is a Rorschach test.
100%. It's about who's doing the asking and where it's being shown just as much as the content itself. It's fascinating.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, looking ahead, will this change how the Biden administration approaches these things? I mean, will we see them doing more interviews on Fox News?
Right.
Or will they to what they know, safer spaces where they have more control over the message? It's a gamble either way.
Huge gamble, especially with an election coming up. We could talk about this for hours. There's so much more to unpack. But I think we've at least scratched the surface here. Hopefully it'll get people thinking.
For sure. And to everyone listening, don't just take our word for it. Go watch the interview yourself. See what you think. Form your own opinions, because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about.
Right.
Giving you the information, the different perspectives, so you can be an informed citizen and make up your own mind.
Exactly.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.